I'm back here working on the feed wagon again today. I've done a little bit of work off camera that I'm going to show you guys here in a minute. But in this video, my main goal is to get the inner fenders done and to get the rear gate frame finished. After those two things are done, then I think I'll be ready to put boards on this thing, build the gate for the rear, and then I think it'll be done. We'll just have to see how far we get today. That's what we're doing on Farmertylerranch. In the last video on this project, you guys saw that I got these bunkline feeder panels stood up on the trailer and kind of figured out where they're going to live. Since then, I've only added a little bit of bracing here on the front. I've got this angle iron frame. I think what I will probably do is put boards in here to block off this front, because as you may recall, we're going to do like a mineral feeder here on the front of the trailer, and I want to be able to separate where the salt blocks are compared to where the hay will be. I also added a little bit of triangular bracing here on the top, and that's just because I've noticed my biggest challenge with this is keeping everything kind of rigid, you know, because we're dealing with long lengths and not especially thick tubing, so everything is kind of flexible, and I'm trying to minimize that as much as I can. This bracing goes a long way to do that, but there's still probably a few more things that I'm going to have to do to strengthen this up a little bit without adding a whole lot of weight. I mean, that's kind of the balancing act. We want it strong, but we kind of want it as light as possible too, because we're only running a single axle. Probably the easiest way to make this more rigid would be to just weld some pipe straight across and connect the bunk feeders. But the problem with that is that if you do that, then you can't feed a 6-foot bale out of this feeder, because that pipe will be too low. When you try to load the fresh bales in there, they're not going to fit. So I've got to get a little bit creative and find my strength in other places. When I cut out the feeder panel here to make a wheel well, essentially, I weakened this pretty significantly. So when I build these fenders or these wheel wells, the first thing that I've kind of got to do is figure out how to do this in a way that's going to restore the strength that has been lost, and maybe even add more strength than what would have been there originally. I've got an idea of how I want to do this, so I think we'll go ahead and tackle these wheel wells first. The first step here is basically adding these, I mean, I guess you could call them like Fender Flares, but they are not here to prevent mud from slinging up. That won't be an issue because the tire is so far in. These are purely to add strength to the side here where we've got this big cutout. My angle finding was a little bit off, and that's why you see there's a pretty big gap in the square tubing that I'm going to have to fill with weld, but I've got everything fitting up pretty good now. But before I can weld these in, I need to trim a little bit of the angle iron on the original trailer frame here so that the square tubing fits up nice, because right now the angle iron's pushing it out and it's making it have a gap that I don't like. Fast forward, it's the next day now. I did get these Fender Flares all finished up. It ended up taking a lot longer than I figured. And isn't that always the case? In addition to getting those welded on and finished, I also went around the trailer and did a bunch of the welding that still needed to be done. That's really not film worthy because it's just kind of boring to sit there and watch me weld. We're making progress, not as fast as I'd like, but that's pretty normal. With the Fender Flares done, I can tell that they do add a lot of rigidity to the trailer, which is exactly what I was hoping they would do, but we're not done yet. I'm still going to build these inner fender wells, and I'm going to make them out of heavy gauge steel, or you know, fairly heavy gauge. I think about 10 gauge, 12 gauge, somewhere around there. And the way that I build the fenders, it's going to kind of help tie all this in together and hopefully make this thing even stronger. I'm going to be chopping up the original fenders that came off of this trailer to make new inner fender wells for the current incarnation. The fenders that came off of this were actually made out of pretty heavy gauge steel. I think they're about 10 gauge, which is about 1/8 of an inch. So this will be perfect for what I want to do, and I don't know what else I would use these for. So this is a great way to sort of repurpose them. Oh boy, they're heavy. Sounds good. Well, I got one side done here, and this actually turned out pretty good, but I learned a few things that are going to come in handy when I do the other side. The first one being, again, nothing really on this frame is very straight. So now, when I made the fenders, I was trying to get everything square and straight. Well, that's all well and good until you try to weld it onto a frame that's not straight. So we had to kind of make some adjustments, and I'll have to come back and fill some gaps with plates. You can see between the fender and the frame here, there's a pretty big gap, but that looks bad now, but when I get the boards put in there, that will fill that and cover it. You'll never know it's there. Welding these fenders onto the feeder panel is probably the hardest part of this whole job, because it was a pretty good joint, but it wasn't perfect. There was a little bit of a gap there, and this metal is so thin that trying to fill that with a stick welder down a long stretch was pretty tough. I ended up running a 3/32 7018 rod at about 40 amps, which is like, you can barely even strike it that low, but it did seem to work. And when I started running it low like that, I wasn't burning through anymore. So although it was a pain, I did go ahead and take the time to weld this seam completely. And the reason for that is you can see now how this fender actually adds a lot of structure to the feeder panel. This boxes it in a way that gussets really couldn't, and it's going to be a lot harder for cattle to bend this or bow it when they're pushing on it because of the way that this fender is constructed. Earlier in the video, I know that I said part of my goals for this video was fenders, fender flares, and this rear gate area. I won't get this rear gate area done in this video, but I actually haven't decided 100% on what design I want to go with down here. So the two that I'm torn between is, one, I could make like a hoop, you know, extend this up, go over, and then drop it down to meet this style. This would be kind of like the gates that I build in the corrals, and then I'll have a feeder panel gate here on the back, and that will be that. The other design that I'm tempted to do, because it would be a lot easier, and I think it would be just as good, but it would be to take some diagonal braces and, you know, kind of like how I've got the angle iron set up here, but just take these down and only come in like a foot with them, do that on either side, and then that should be sufficient, I think, for when cattle are pushing on this eating. That'll make it plenty strong enough, and as long as I don't come out with the braces too far, I'll still have plenty of room to set, you know, even a 6-foot round bill back here. Now, the real attractive thing about this is, number one, it's a lot easier to do, but number two, then I don't have to worry about head clearance or anything when I'm setting bales in here, because I would have to make that crossbar at least 6 feet tall, preferably closer to like 7 feet, so I have a little bit of room when I'm setting a 6-foot bale in here. So it would just be kind of nice if I didn't have anything up there that I had to worry about. I guess the biggest downfall to doing diagonal braces on either side is that they will interfere with the rear feed bunk panel, at least on one side. So I could match the angle of my slats and make, you know, one of these diagonals just line up perfectly with the feed bunk diagonal. But then when you get down to this side, the diagonals will be going the wrong way, so we'll definitely be blocking one off. But the more I think about it, the more I think, you know, maybe I should block these side ones off anyway, because it's impossible for a cow to be eating in this slot and in a slot here, because their heads are just going to be hitting each other. So you may as well block one off so you avoid that. And so I don't know. The reason that I'm going through all this and kind of thinking out loud is because I want to hear what you guys think. If you have an idea, if you've built one of these before, if you've seen one before that you thought worked good, let me know what you think I should do on the back end of this thing. The next time that you guys see this project, I intend to have this other fender finished. I'll have at least a plan decided on what I'm going to do on the rear end of the feeder. And once those things are done, I think we'll be ready to lay the floor down in this thing. But I've still got a lot of work that needs to be done on the tongue. I've got some parts in the mail. We're going to completely change the way this works for a couple of reasons that I'll get into in the next video when we're actually doing it. But get ready, because this is going to change a lot up front as well. So now I need to just basically copy everything that I did on this side with the fender and redo it on this side. Hopefully the second one goes a little bit faster now that I've got a little bit of experience under my belt, but I don't think you guys need to see it because it's going to be just the same as this one was. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys, and I hope I'll see you again on Farmer Tyler Ranch.